I'd like to welcome all of the viewers to our first faculty spotlight for the Center for Leadership Ethics. Today we have Allison Gabriel, who is an associate professor of management here at Eller. She is going to be discussing some of her research, which was recently published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, which is one of our top journals in the field. Can you just tell us what incivility is exactly and why it's an important area to study?
Sure. So when we're talking about incivility, we're talking, the formal definition is low intensity deviant behaviors. And what that really means is kind of rude, discourteous interactions that might unfold each day at work. So this can be somebody addressing you in unprofessional terms, either publicly or privately, making a rude, snarky comment, excluding you from a conversation at work. All of these little things can really add up and make you feel like you're being treated in this kind of negative manner at work.
And based on your research, do we have an indication of how often this actually happens to employees?
Not in this study, but we actually have evidence in some of the other work we did that this is a daily occurrence.
So obviously this is a difficult thing for employees to deal with, but me as the CEO, let's say, why should I care about this happening at my organization?
Yeah, and that's a good question because, again, this usually doesn't hit the register that we would see with other really extreme behaviors in the workplace. But, there's some estimates that incivility experiences can cost organizations about $14,000 per employee. And that's because when employees are exposed to this, because it's kind of vague and ambiguous as to why somebody was rude to you, you might start to mentally withdraw from work. There's definitely correlates with lower job satisfaction, increased burnout. All of these things can be contributors to lower performance at work.
And one of the interesting findings in the incivility literature is that women actually seem to experience more incivility than men. Can you just kind of explain, why that's occurring?
Yeah, and then there's a few different explanations for why that's occurring. One is that, men make up the more dominant social group, just in general in society. And so when you think about kind of structures and organizations, it's likely that women hold maybe lower status positions compared to men. So it's more likely that women would be targeted by other individuals just because of their general status. There's been some other work, though, that suggests that, because more overt forms of discrimination have become increasingly taboo, any kind of, harsh tendencies towards women may start to leak out in these uncivil behaviors rather than full-blown cases of harassment.
And your work that was published recently focuses on gender and incivility. And so can you talk a little bit about how your study adds to our understanding of gender and incivility in the workplace?
Yeah, and so, the point I just made about, women generally experience this more than men, that was kind of our launch point, because as we were looking at the literature, we realized, well, on the whole, women are saying that they're experiencing more incivility, but we don't know from whom. So it was very unclear whether it was that men were targeting them in these uncivil ways or if it was actually coming from other women. And so what we really wanted to do was design a series of studies, and we did 3 to try to unpack, if women on the whole are saying that they're experiencing more incivility, where is that coming from?
And one of the things that you talk about in the paper is this queen bee syndrome. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah, so it's this idea that actually originates from honeybee colonies. So it's not too often that we get to draw from, animal behavior literatures, but that's kind of what's going on here. So if you think about the structure of honeybee colonies, there's often one queen bee at the top, and she pretty much does everything she can to stave off competition from other female bees. And so folks have started to bring this research into organizations, into schools, and have found some evidence that when women obtain, positions of power, sometimes they're more likely to actually kind of push out other women to protect their resources.
Another couple of terms that I think are kind of crucial to your paper are the concepts of agentic and communal behaviors. Can you kind of explain how that feeds into the queen bee syndrome and what you were hypothesizing in your study?
Yeah, so we have gender norms, right, for how we expect men and women on the whole to act. So agentic behaviors really correlate with typical leadership behaviors we would expect at work. So being really assertive, assigning people things, voicing concerns, speaking out, acting in a pretty dominant manner in the workplace. And it's usually believed that men are more likely to exhibit those behaviors. Communal behaviors, though, are more stereotypically female. They're being nurturing and warm and supportive, lending a supportive ear in the workplace, being compassionate to other people. And so, beyond just looking at whether women reported more incivility than men and who was targeting them, we wanted to see, well, what happens if women deviate from these norms? So what happens to that agentic woman or somebody who maybe isn't as communal in the workplace? Does that send signals that, yeah, this person is my competition because they're acting kind of against the grain for what I might expect them to do?
So you conducted 3 studies. Can you just briefly describe what your findings were across those 3 studies and how they kind of built on each other?
Yeah, so in each of the 3 studies, and it's important to note that we studied both men and women across them, so this wasn't just all women in our studies. They were 3 separate ones where we had surveys being distributed. And in each survey, women and men would report the extent to which over the last month they experienced incivility from women and from men, just so we could do a general comparison. And across all 3 of those, consistently, women reported more incivility experiences from other women than from men. And then from there, we started to try to unpack, well, what happens when women are agentic? And we found that those were the women that were more likely to be targeted by women in an uncivil manner.
Was there any difference in how men responded to women acting either agentically or communally?
No, we didn't really see any difference there. And we kind of try to unpack this in a variety of different ways. And when you actually look at men's experiences here when they deviated, so when men said that they typically were more communal, we actually found that men reported lower incivility from their male counterparts. So there was some type of social crediting going on, that women, when they deviate, they kind of seemingly get punished by other women for that. But when men deviate, it kind of tells the opposite story, that maybe they have a little bit more latitude to go ahead and go a little bit against the grain.
So based on your results, what do you think your message is either to employees or organizations on how to deal with incivility and these differences that you found in regards to gender?
Well, I think just in general, on the whole, I think we need to treat these experiences seriously. So I think sometimes there's this kind of quick knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, like you're just talking about these kind of rude one-off comments, kind of big deal, who cares? But I think when you think about how employees in the same organization might be consistently exposed to these things, that's going to start to build over time. You're going to have a workforce that's really unwell in terms of their well-being. You're going to have a workforce that's kind of mentally checking out and thinking about quitting. And so I think just at a very basic level, it would be good for organizations, for managers to realize, like, yeah, these things matter. They may not hit this register that we would expect with some more serious behaviors, but they do matter. The other thing I think we need to get better at is just kind of talking about civility in organizations and what that means. Our study, unfortunately, we weren't able to try to figure out, well, how do we reverse this effect? I would love work, and that's something we're thinking about, of how we can reverse this effect, how we can improve interactions amongst people. But I think talking about civility, talking about how good ideas and leadership behaviors can come from anyone, that it's not just men who should be exhibiting these behaviors, but it's good for women to exhibit them too. I think that would really matter. And again, just talking about how people feel when they're exposed to these things.